The story you are about to hear is true. Only the names have been changed.
The Big Boy is a famous steam locomotive, being recognized by people who aren't even rail fans or fans of steam locomotives themselves. At a time being unmatched in power, and even now remaining unmatched in intimidation, there's a lot to marvel at when taking in any of these locomotives. One could marvel at the large design, wonder about the unbelievable amount of manpower that went into making such a beast, or perhaps wonder what were to happen if one of those monsters jumped the track. Sad to say, it's actually happened, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
The story you are about to hear is true.
The incident itself was known as the Big Boy 4005 wreck, as the locomotive that was involved was Big Boy 4005. On April 27, 1953, the crew of UP 4005's freight train started out on a routine haul across the open prairie of southern Wyoming. Engineer Leo Murray, fireman Lawrence Andreas, and brakeman James R. Anderton made up the head-end crew. Conductor James Walker and brakeman Ivan Shurigar, apologies if I butchered that, made up the rear-end crew. 62 cars and a caboose followed the giant 600-ton locomotive. At 9:10 a.m., the train passed through Wamsutter, Wyoming, heading westbound, not knowing that in just 10 minutes the unthinkable would happen. The morning was cloudy, with a light mist, and the descending grade that the locomotive was on made for easy travel. All seemed normal. However, at the same time, just 8.5 miles to the west, another event was unfolding. A section gang stationed at Fruin traveled 3.6 miles to the east to Red Desert on a track motor car to obtain a supply of switch ties. The foreman and 4 section workers arrived in Red Desert and were approached by a sheep herder requesting assistance in getting a sheep across the tracks. After he received the lineup information, the foreman assigned 1 section man to proceed eastward and another westward to provide flag protection at each end of the side tracks. After 1 eastbound and 1 westbound train passed, they were to provide protection for the sheep herder. As an added protection, 2 other section men were to open a switch in each main track, which led to the siding. This would display a block signal down the track in each direction, warning any unannounced approaching trains to slow down. The foreman unlocked both switches and the section men were instructed to open the switch on his hand signal. The foreman then walked back to the sheep herder, some 300 yards from the switch, to tell him what the men were going to do. As 4005 approached the east end of the Red Desert siding, the section men opened the siding switch and then, seeing the massive locomotive barreling down on him, frantically made an unsuccessful attempt to close it before the engine passed. As the locomotive would enter the siding, the engineer would make an emergency application of the brakes. Unfortunately, 4005 entered the open switch at 50 miles an hour, causing it to careen off the rails and skid along its left side, tearing up rail and roadbed. The locomotive, tender, and first 18 cars derailed. The cab of the locomotive was destroyed as the tender tore into it, twisting and smashing the metal. The first 12 cars were badly damaged and piled together in a large heap. The 13th to 17th cars, however, were somewhat damaged from the force of impacting against each other and from initially toppling off of the rails. Scattered about the scene was the train's miscellaneous loads: tractors, typewriters, sewing machines, and unfortunately, now dead hogs. The engineer Leo Murray and fireman Lawrence Andreas were killed instantly. Even more interesting than the wreck itself might be what took place directly after it. The rear crew did not know anything was wrong until they had saw the emergency signal come from the engineer. When they looked out and saw the cars piling up, they had both rushed out from the caboose. It was at this point Walker headed to the front of the train, and using a dispatcher's phone called in what had happened. He could not get near the wreck, however, as the hissing steam billowed around the injured train. It took nearly 25 minutes for the steam to subside. Amazingly, the front brakeman, James Anderton, would still be alive. Anderton's leg was twisted and pinned between the wooden seat and the steel rod of the cab. He was trapped in an area of the cab no larger than 18 inches high and 4 feet wide for 10 hours while rescue workers removed tons of coal and cut through steel to free him. Anderton asked rescuers for a drink of water and a cigarette. A doctor was able to reach a narrow opening and administer a dose of morphine to subside Anderton's terrible pain. Anderton later told rescuers that his hands hurt and that he was chilling a little, but no longer could feel the pain in his foot. Anderton will go on to tell rescue workers, "He threw it right in front of us. The switch. They threw it right in front of us. They didn't give us a chance. I felt the engine rock. I don't know how many times it rocked. The next thing I knew, I felt the steam hitting me in the face, and I thought I was a goner. All I could do was think about getting my hands over my face." Anderton would later succumb to his injuries at 10:57 a.m. on Wednesday, April 29th, from 2nd and 3rd degree burns covering 80% of his body, severe prolonged shock, and several other complications. Track crews would work swiftly to clear the wreckage. Many of the 4 carloads of pigs were killed upon impact. However, according to workmen at the site, some pigs provided comic relief during the emotionally and physically draining rescue operation. Occasionally, a pig would regain consciousness and, with a terrific grunt, take off running through the curious bystanders. Despite receiving extensive damage and having its cab destroyed by its tender, this would not be the end of Locomotive 4005, as Union Pacific would quickly repair and return the locomotive to service. 4005 now rests in Denver's Forney Museum of Transportation, forever remaining the beast of the era now behind us, and still unfortunately carrying its past behind it. To end this video off, I want to leave you with what one of the Union Pacific workers had to say when the engine was brought back for repairs. Several days later, I was back at work on the graveyard shift, and the dispatcher told us that the engine from the derailment was being brought back in, and was just at the west end of the yard getting ready to come past the little dispatch office. We all stood outside in the still of the darkness. Not yet visible, we could hear this groaning and wrenching of metal coming very slowly down the rails. It was the big boy, and it gave you a very eerie feeling as it became visible in the old lamps of the dispatch office. Slowly it came into view, and if ever I thought I had seen a ghost, this was it. I did not know a big boy could die, but there it was, and how sad it was just limping along like an old gray horse with one broken leg. The cab was completely gone. Only the gray color of the firebox was visible, and some of the side rods were missing. It even looked as if the frame itself had been broken. It just lumbered by all of us, standing there with our mouths open, not believing what we were seeing. This once huge, big, beautiful thing that was once a living machine of giant steel, it disappeared. It disappeared into the darkness like it came, being dragged like a person to the grave at the east end of the yard for temporary storage. I could almost see Fireman Andreas waving to me as it went past.